Imagine a story so electric, so unseen, that it almost slipped past history. Jeff Beck stealing into Midnight Studios.
Joss, and she just nailed it today in a spectacular way. I think we were all kind of thrilled.
Chasing secret tapes. Carrying heartbreak over the thunder of riffs. What if I told you the 6 bands Beck calls his all-time favorites?
I said, not much, you know, and he says, well, what about a couple of nights at Ronnie's? And I went, yeah, thanks, I ran away.
Aren't just names on a list, but skeleton keys that unlocked his sound.
Some girlfriend rang up and said, you got to hear this guy, Jimi Hendrix. And I went, oh, really? She said, yeah, I was at a club last night.
And some of them almost derailed him entirely. You've heard the legends, Beck the guitarist, Beck the innovator, but the raw truth is darker and more twist-filled than most admit. These bands didn't just influence him, they haunted him, they challenged him, they forced him to become more than just a guitar player. Today we pull back the stage curtain. We reveal the 6 bands Jeff Beck said were his favorites, and the secrets, betrayals, and musical battles that made that affection so hard-won. Stay until the end. The 6th band, it's the one story that turned his career inside out. The Yardbirds, birth, betrayal, and breakthrough. Long before Beck became the name uttered with reverence in guitar solo debates, there was the Yardbirds, a raw, ragged, musical mob of young men on the edge, electrifying London's underground. Back in 1965, when Beck first answered the call to replace Eric Clapton,
he is the most unique guitar player, and the most, probably the most devoted. I mean, from what I know of Jeff.
Nobody could have predicted the storms he'd help unleash. But Beck didn't just fill a slot, he exploded it open. From his first blistering gig, Beck looked for the edges. Others strummed blues tradition. Beck stretched feedback, bent strings until they screamed, chased sustain like it was a ghost haunting the fretboard. The Yardbirds became his forge. Their live shows, sweaty, unpredictable, unrelenting, just barely captured on tape, became the stuff of legend. But with greatness came tension. They say backstage was chaos. Disagreements over direction, over recording commitments, over how raw or polished to be. Beck watched as management pushed the Yardbirds toward commercial formulas, radio-friendly singles, and saw a spark of betrayal. The debut single after his arrival, Heart Full of Soul, was meant to showcase spiky exotic rhythms in Beck's experimental bite. But executives fretted about whether it'd alienate the mainstream. Beck felt known compromises diluted the wildness, the authenticity that drew him in. Still, the larger picture was undeniable. The Yardbirds taught Beck lessons no textbook could, how distortion could be punctuation, not just noise, how live improvisation could set you free, how every solo could be an argument with silence. Around this time, Beck reportedly spent hours alone after shows, chasing new sounds, dissecting what his guitar could even do when pushed past comfort. He listened to bits of old blues that nobody else cared for, trying to pull those voices into the cosmic feedback of British rock. The Yardbirds weren't just his first success, they were the crucible of his identity. But with success came threat, the threat that he'd be boxed in, that praise would seduce him into playing safe. Beck saw what happened to many young guitarists drawn into fame's spotlight. They lost their edge. So while he remained loyal in spirit to the Yardbirds, he made secret pacts with himself. Never to lose curiosity, never to let commerce erase experimentation. And maybe that's why the Yardbirds are immortal in Beck's heart. They represent beginnings, with all the chaos, all the risk, all the raw possibility. The love for them isn't sentimental, it's vital. Because without what he learned during that time, without those midnight riffs and backstage arguments, Beck might never have dared the rest of his journey. The Beatles, the paradox of perfection and the fear it inspired. Mention the Beatles and most think of mop tops, catchy tunes, and a cultural explosion.
Don't let me down.
Jeff Beck saw something darker, something desperate beneath that perfection. He didn't just admire them, he feared them. Because to him, the Beatles were living proof that musical evolution could leave you bleeding if you didn't keep pace. Imagine standing on stage knowing that four guys in Liverpool have already redefined what the recording studio can be. They had tape loops, sitars, backward guitar solos, orchestras, strange time signatures. Beck loved this kind of experimentation, yet it also haunted him. If the Beatles could reinvent themselves album after album, then every riff Beck played afterwards risked sounding like an echo. He once shared that Revolver dropped like a bomb in the UK guitar community. Suddenly, new guitar players weren't enough unless they could match its inventiveness. Beck heard Gilmour, Harrison, Lennon, McCartney layering sounds, expanding what a song could feel like, not just what it sounded like. He dreamed of that scale, that audacity, but he also perceived the danger of being consumed by expectation, by the fear of falling short. Still, he worshipped the readability, the way the Beatles merged the accessible with the avant-garde. Beck openly admired George Harrison's slide work and melodic restraint. How a note ended meant as much as a note begun. Harrison's guitar wasn't always front and center,
Do it right, child. I got my mind set on you.
but its voice, its whispers and bends, spoke in gaps and spaces. Beck tried to absorb that, the power in silence, the art in the in-between. There's more though, whispers of late-night listening sessions, Beck lying awake as Sgt. Pepper's stereo separation opened new volumes in his head. Stories say he'd rewind certain passages repeatedly, chasing tonal decisions, wondering how they built the texture, what mic, what studio effect, what mix trick pulled the emotion through. To Beck, the Beatles were both a North Star and a gauntlet thrown down. Their success meant something beyond fame. It meant you could reach wide audiences, you could craft joy and beauty at scale, and still be brave. But their perfection also raised the stakes for everyone else. For Beck, loving them was a contract. Create, evolve, take risks, or be left behind. Jimi Hendrix, experience, the rival who set his guitar on fire, literally and figuratively. If there was one name that could make Jeff Beck's stomach tighten with both dread and delight, it was Jimi Hendrix.
Some girlfriend rang up and said, "You got to hear this guy, Jimi Hendrix." And I went, "Oh, really?" She said, "Yeah, I was at a club last night."
Before Hendrix, Beck already had a reputation as the guy who could wring sounds out of a Stratocaster that no one else could imagine. Then Hendrix landed in London in 1966, and suddenly every guitarist in Britain felt the ground shift under their feet. People close to Beck say the first time he saw Hendrix live was like watching someone unlock a hidden language. Hendrix didn't just play the guitar, he attacked it, coaxed feedback into a roar, turned accidental noise into melody. Legend has it Beck stood frozen in the crowd that night, torn between awe and a sick realization. He was witnessing a new frontier and wondering if he'd been left behind. But that shock sparked something feral. Beck didn't retreat, he sharpened his own experiments. He spent long, late hours in studios trying to bend notes to breaking points, chasing the wild sustained Hendrix seemed to summon at will. Friends recall him obsessing over amp settings, exploring every inch of his guitar's electronics, determined to prove he could meet that challenge on his own terms. The two eventually met, and the encounter was both warm and electric. Beck later said Hendrix was disarmingly gentle off stage, almost shy, but on stage he was a storm. They shared trade secrets, little tweaks to pickups, tricks with vibrato bars, but also engaged in an unspoken duel every time they played the same festival bill. Beck once joked that after Hendrix set his guitar on fire at Monterey, he considered smashing his own instrument just to keep up. What made Hendrix truly dangerous in Beck's eyes wasn't just technique, it was audacity. Hendrix tore through genre walls, fusing blues, soul, psychedelic rock, and pure noise. That freedom validated Beck's own instincts to defy the rules of British blues rock. It was like Hendrix handed him permission to go further, faster. There's a story insiders love. After a late-night jam, Beck walked back to his flat and silently promised he'd never again settle for safe. He later described it as the night he decided the guitar could be a voice, a machine, a weapon, and a whisper, all in a single song. That revelation colored everything from Truth to Blow by Blow. Even decades later, Beck spoke of Hendrix with a mix of reverence and rivalry. "He terrified all of us," he admitted in interviews, a grin hinting at pride. The fear was part of the fuel. Hendrix was the meteor that threatened to outshine him, and in doing so, pushed Beck toward his own masterpieces. Mahavishnu Orchestra, the jazz rock shockwave that shattered boundaries. If Hendrix lit a fire under Jeff Beck, the Mahavishnu Orchestra blasted the very walls of genre to dust. By the early 1970s, Beck had already conquered blues rock and dipped into psychedelia. Then he heard John McLaughlin's fusion juggernaut, and it was like an alien transmission. The Mahavishnu Orchestra didn't play songs so much as ignite them. Complex time signatures, 7/8, 9/8, lightning-fast guitar and violin duels, Eastern scales folded into rock fury. To most listeners, it was bewildering. To Beck, it was a revelation. He later called them, "The band that showed me music has no borders." The first time Beck attended a Mahavishnu concert, friends say he sat slack-jawed, scribbling mental notes. McLaughlin's guitar lines were ferocious but precise, often racing alongside Jan Hammer's synthesizer in impossible unison. The drummer, Billy Cobham, hit with the force of a rock god while maintaining jazz finesse. It was a sound built for virtuosos, and Beck wanted in. Backstage meetings followed. McLaughlin and Beck compared modes, talked gear, explored Indian classical influences. Beck realized this wasn't about shredding for ego. It was about exploring the outer edges of melody and rhythm. He started weaving odd time signatures and modal runs into his own work, laying the groundwork for Blow by Blow and Wired, albums that redefined jazz rock fusion. Yet there was tension too. Beck knew this kind of music demanded total commitment. The precision was almost punishing. During one late-night session with keyboardist John Hammer, Beck reportedly laughed, "I need a math degree to play this stuff." But he kept at it, pushing his technique until it matched the ambition. The real shock for fans came when Beck began performing Mahavishnu-inspired pieces live. Audiences expecting blues licks were hit with sprawling, meter-bending instrumentals. Some critics were baffled, but Beck didn't care. He'd glimpsed a bigger universe. "If you're not scaring yourself," he said in one interview, "you're not moving forward." Mahavishnu's impact lingered in every note Beck played afterward. You can hear it in the elastic phrasing of Scatterbrain, the restless structures of Freeway Jam. The band gave him license to abandon standard rock forms entirely, to treat the guitar as a portal to somewhere unknown. For Beck, the Mahavishnu Orchestra wasn't just another influence. It was a cosmic challenge. They proved that music could be as intricate as a symphony, yet hit with the force of a thunderclap. That revelation propelled him into the most daring phase of his career, one where technical mastery served pure, boundaryless exploration. Stevie Wonder and his band, Soul Alchemy and the Song That Got Away. When Jeff Beck spoke about the musicians who shaped him, his voice softened in a way few ever heard. That happened every time he mentioned Stevie Wonder. To Beck, Wonder wasn't just a soul singer with chart-topping hits. He was a wizard of sound, a one-man revolution who bent technology and feeling into something close to magic. The turning point came in 1972. Beck was invited to a Detroit studio where Wonder was experimenting with early synthesizers and drum machines. "It felt like walking into the future," Beck later said. Wonder was recording what would become Talking Book, and he played Beck a rough version of a new track. The groove was thick with clavinet funk, the lyrics sly and dangerous. Wonder offered it to Beck. Superstition. Imagine it. One of the greatest funk rock songs ever written, handed to Jeff Beck before the world even heard it. They cut a blistering version with Beck on guitar, full of dirt and attitude. But when Motown executives realized the track was pure gold, they insisted Stevie release it himself. Beck's version stayed in the vaults while Wonder's shot to #1. For some musicians, that would sting for life. Beck never showed resentment. Instead, he spoke of Wonder with awe. Nobody grooves like Stevie, or he told interviewers. What fascinated him wasn't just the voice or the keyboards, it was the architecture of Wonder's songs. Tracks like Living for the City or Golden Lady wove gospel, jazz, funk, and biting social commentary into seamless worlds. Beck saw in that fusion the same restless curiosity he carried in his own heart. Back in London, Beck tried to bottle a bit of that soul alchemy. Listen to Cause We've Ended as lovers on his landmark Blow by Blow album, written for him by Wonder. The guitar doesn't just sing, it pleads, it cries. Beck bends notes so delicately they sound like a human voice catching in the throat. It's a direct line to the lessons he learned watching Wonder turn emotion into vibration. Insiders say Beck studied Wonder's band as much as the man himself. Those players, Nathan Watts on bass, Ray Parker Jr., on guitar could shift from a pocket-tight funk groove to jazzy improvisation in a blink. Beck loved that elasticity. He began hiring musicians who could pivot the same way, building live shows where any song might stretch into an uncharted jam. And there's the deeper connection. Both men were sonic explorers. Wonder pushed synthesizers beyond their limits. Beck pushed the guitar until it spoke new languages. Each refused to accept the boundaries of their instruments. To Beck, Stevie Wonder wasn't simply a favorite. He was proof that technical genius and raw feeling could collide without compromise. Led Zeppelin, brothers, rivals, and the soundquake that shook the world. Last on Beck's list is a band tied to him by blood and fire, Led Zeppelin. Before Zeppelin conquered the planet, Beck and Jimmy Page had prowled the same London clubs, traded licks, even shared the same band, the Yardbirds. Their paths split, but their destinies stayed tangled. When Zeppelin's debut dropped in 1969, Beck heard it before most of the world. It was like a bomb going off, and he said, the sheer weight of the sound, the low-end thunder of John Paul Jones and John Bonham, the banshee wail of Robert Plant, the layered guitars of Page redefined what rock could be. Beck wasn't intimidated, he was electrified. Behind the admiration, though, lurked a friendly rivalry. Critics constantly compared Page's soaring riffs to Beck's experimental wizardry. Fans argued over who was the true innovator. Beck smiled at the debate, but quietly resolved to carve a path Zeppelin could never match. That resolve birthed his fusion masterpieces in the 1970s. Music too slippery and adventurous for arena rock, but every bit as daring. He also recognized Page's genius for the studio as instrument. Beck marveled at how Zeppelin used echo chambers, reverse tapes, and strange mic placements to make songs like Whole Lotta Love feel larger than life. It wasn't just guitar playing, it was world building. Beck absorbed those lessons for his own productions, layering textures that made a single guitar sound like an orchestra. Personal ties made the connection deeper. Beck and Page remained friends, occasionally jamming in private. There's a story of them meeting after a Zeppelin show at Madison Square Garden. No ego, just two guitarists trading secrets until dawn. Beck later said, Jimmy always knew how to make a guitar sound like thunder. I was after lightning. What he loved most was Zeppelin's range. One night it was the feral stomp of Immigrant Song. The next, the fragile beauty of Going to California. That balance of brute force and acoustic grace convinced Beck that true greatness isn't about volume. It's about dynamics, the quiet that makes the roar unforgettable. Even as he forged his own genre-busting path, Beck tipped his hat to Zeppelin's global impact. They didn't just top charts, they reshaped the arena concert, built myths around the rock star life, and left a catalog that still sends shivers through young guitarists. Outro, Jeff Beck's favorites weren't random picks. They were 6 seismic forces that forged his identity. The Yardbirds, his chaotic apprenticeship. The Beatles, the gold standard of reinvention. Jimi Hendrix's Experience, the rival who lit a fire under him. Mahavishnu Orchestra, the cosmic challenge that shattered genre walls. Stevie Wonder and his band, the soulful alchemists of groove and feeling. Led Zeppelin, the brothers and rivals who proved rock could be limitless. Together they reveal the blueprint of Beck's genius, fearless innovation, restless curiosity, and a refusal to play safe. If this deep dive shocked you, or if you learned something new about the secret roots of Jeff Beck's sound,